Hey, welcome grade nines. Today we are talking about when and why governments intervene. They get involved in a market economy. And truly, we're talking about mixed economies too that lean towards the market side, like Canada. So let's dive right into that for a moment. So, in a market economy, individuals, businesses, corporations, etc., along with those forces of supply and demand, answer the problem of scarcity. You might remember that as there being unlimited wants and needs, but limited or finite resources to get there. So, in an economic system, we're answering the questions of what gets produced, who gets it, and how does it get made. So a market economy answers with the invisible hand, this guiding force of the market where whatever needs to happen will happen, and it'll happen in a chain of events. So there will be no person saying, we need pencils, so we need to cut down trees, we need to find rubber plants, we need to mine graphite, do all of those pieces. Right, there's a supply chain that will build around that, and around each of those supply chains will be, truck stops, restaurants, things like that to move it. And so this is really the power of the invisible hand, a market economy. However, while the government isn't the key player in a market economy, we've talked about how market economies often have some room for government. And the room we spoke about is, generally speaking, law enforcement and defense. But there are some times where the government will choose to become involved in the economy. So we're going to take a look at some different case studies from different time periods, discuss them. We'll get a flip grid up where we can do some work. But while we're going through, I want you to think about why or why not the government should take action for each issue. So one such item that sees government involvement is environmental disasters. Certainly in the 2000s, under President George W. Bush, the U.S. faced Hurricane Katrina, and the U.S. government donated money and resources to help the citizens of Louisiana escape and rebuild, although there was critiques that it didn't go far enough. In Alberta, we have the Fort McMurray wildfires, where there was some amount of support from the government beyond the firefighting capabilities. Affected residents could get $1,250 with an additional $500 for any dependents. There was some support for landlords and small businesses. Insurance was permitted to extend how long you can make an insurance claim for. The law says you can only claim up to 2 years later. Extensions were granted in 85% of cases requiring them or requesting them. So, helping people rebuild in the wake of a disaster is one common reason a market economy might intervene. Certainly, government will intervene to protect the environment. Here in Alberta, there was a CN rail derailment at Wabamun. In 2005, the Canadian government made sure that CN cleaned things up. In 2013, in Quebec, the Lac-Mégantic derailment polluted local land and rivers. Ultimately, a big chunk of the town needed to be demolished. And even the state of Maine in the United States weighed in because they often share rail lines between Canada and the United States. Other communities had to change their sources of drinking water. People couldn't use water recreationally or really at all. So a whole bunch of cases there. Food safety is another kind of classic example. This is the main reason I don't purchase from Maple Leaf Foods, because when I was a little older than you all, there was a massive recall of their food because of a listeria outbreak. They weren't adequately cleaning their food. And in fact, food safety is one of the first ways market economies saw government intervention. In the United States, this was one of the first regulated industries. Previously, practices like dipping eggs in formaldehyde, delicious, delicious formaldehyde, was common. They'd go bad, you'd dip them in formaldehyde, and you'd sell them. And that practice was banned in the early 1900s. So food safety is often a place where we see regulation emerging from market governments. Labor disputes, certainly. We had this in the news here basically until the COVID outbreak. Ontario's teachers' unions were on strike. In Alberta, the last major teacher strike occurred in 2002. When teachers were demanding better classroom conditions. The government ultimately passed legislation ordering teachers back to work. This also happened in Saskatchewan in the 2000s. Uh, and many people are actually legally barred from striking. Doctors, paramedics, police, essential services aren't allowed to strike to make sure those services carry on. And some will argue that educators become essential services when these strikes are ordered closed. Of course, the granddaddy of all strikes in Canada is the Winnipeg General Strike at the during kind of World War One era. At the same time period, the Russian Revolution was happening. Ultimately, the government intervened so aggressively that the police that you see pictured at the bottom there uh, came in. There was a crew of police on foot, but also on horseback, and they injured workers and even killed a guy. If you go to the Canadian Museum of Human Rights, they actually have a whole display dedicated to the Winnipeg General Strike. Makes sense given that that museum is in Winnipeg. Homelessness, there's so many examples of governments intervening with respect to homelessness. In the summer of 2007, there's about 2,000 in Edmonton. I haven't been able to get the current numbers because of this COVID crisis. It's kind of in flux, but they formed this tent city pictured at left there to as a form of protest. The government again shut down the tent city, but then provided additional funding to make more affordable housing for people. And again, homelessness in cold snaps, things like this, government often will open up facilities or increase their funding to facilities to mitigate those issues. There can be various taxes, etc. You may have seen playgrounds where it describes, um, part of this was made with recycled tires. But governments will put taxes on various things. So at the time, the tire tax was implemented was $4 a tire to ensure recycling was occurring, among other things. You'll pay such taxes on electronics, on a number of various items. So, what's the purpose of taxing things like electronics and tires? I mean, the Great Depression, we'll talk about at length in Social 30, but the big thing is massive unemployment. The president, Franklin D. Roosevelt, engages in massive, massive spending projects. Something called the alphabet agencies happens. We call them the alphabet agencies because they had these ridiculous acronyms, just random letters thrown together. For different organizations. They built the Hoover Dam. They electrified a chunk of the U.S. that had never had electrical access, including farms. They built roads. They dug ditches. They cleaned streets. There were even people paid to teach art classes in community centers. Massive, massive government intervention. It wasn't quite as dramatic in Canada because we're somewhat conservative in our approach at the time, uh, but we still had similar spending in that depression. During the 2008 recession, depression, whatever you want to call it, Barack Obama, as a new president, announced $500 billion in spending or stimulus to help the American economy. Canada largely weathered this storm, at least in the short term, much better than the United States because earlier governments, under the Chrétien, Martin, and then Stephen Harper, really did control our banks. So we didn't see quite the failure. It just took longer to get here and hit other industries. But we didn't require quite the same stimulus spending. But of course, with COVID-19, we are seeing spending with taxes and loan payments being deferred, pushed off, payments made to people through employment insurance and other areas, the federal government paying up to 75% of an employee's wage, more funding for healthcare. These are all shifts left for both orders of government. Bailouts, companies can get bailed out. There's so many different companies, the auto industry, the banking industry, airlines today are going to be a big topic, but companies that build airplanes, in this case Bombardier out of Quebec in 2017, received over $1 billion in money from the public purse. Now they got into some hot water because they used some of that money to give their executives bonuses. Not good. But there are people that would have seen this as beneficial. Just for the record, other countries like Brazil actually protested this, arguing that it interferes with their own industry's ability to compete with Canada's. But that's a story for another time. And of course, market economies will ensure there's competition. Your textbook talks about the artificial increase in chocolate price. I've shared with you before that when I was your age, the average chocolate bar is about $2, and now you'll regularly see chocolate bars cost about $1. There's price fixing happening where the chocolate companies weren't competing with one another; they were boosting the price they could pay artificially. That goes against the principle of a market economy. A market economy should be a race to either the best service or product or the lowest price. In Canada, our Competition Bureau alleged in 2018 that 7 companies were artificially increasing the price of bread for Canadians, somewhere to the tune of $1.50 a loaf. Loblaws kind of ratted on the other companies, hoping to curry favor with the government and the public. They sent $25 gift cards to anyone that applied for it. But ultimately, that did not satisfy Canadians who are in the midst of a lawsuit, a class action lawsuit to the tune of $1 billion against these companies. It's unclear what the outcome of that will be, but ensuring competition is a key thing governments do in market economies. So there are many, many ways governments intervene in a market economy. I am hoping you can come up with your views on each of these cases. Should the government have intervened, yes or no? And see if you can come up with an example of where a market economy has intervened. You can use one of my topics or one of your own, and we will put those on Flipgrid as video responses. Hey, as always, if you have any questions or concerns, give me a shout. Use the tools available to you, including Google Meet office hours, email, and of course, your Flipgrid responses. I will be here for you.